we're going to talk some more serious agronomy here at the moment. First of all, we'll go through a soil test. I don't know what you can see, particularly from the back there. We'll go through and talk about what the various concepts mean so that you can understand a soil test. So we've got a soil test here, and we've got this thing called CEC. So CEC, cation exchange capacity, really relates to how much clay, remember clay is negatively charged, holds on to cations. And what's exchange mean? Well, when the plant says, I want some calcium, and it can sense calcium by the size of the ion, I'm going to have, however it does that, grabs the calcium off the clay, it's got to balance itself. It just took in a positive, and it spits out hydrogen. It exchanges calcium for hydrogen. Hydrogen sticks where the calcium was, and that's called acid, creating an acid soil. That's emptying your pantry. The more acidic your soil, the less there is stuck on that clay colloid. That's what determines acidity. So CEC is a measure of basically the storage capacity of the soil, how much clay you got in the soil. So this one's got lots. You know, my apple farm's got a CEC of 5, so it's just a sand. This is not much clay at all. This has got lots of clay, it's 31. So CEC, cation exchange capacity. The plant's taking the cation from the clay, replacing it with another cation called hydrogen that starts to lower pH and, of course, limit. And what that's a measure of is an empty pantry. An empty fuel tank. The more acidic you are, the more empty your fuel tank, because you've taken all the goodies and replaced it with hydrogen and makes soils acidic. And that's what's called cation exchange capacity. How much clay you got depends how much you can do that exchange of the nutrient for hydrogen. So that's CEC. But what's this TEC thing about? That stands for total exchange capacity, and it's really important that your soil test has that, because otherwise you will have a completely misleading concept of what we call mineral balance. Now, I'm going to explain the story, and I sort of touched upon it yesterday. There's a guy called Professor William Albrecht, who they call the father of soil science, who thought, well, you know, so we'll go down to this segment here called base saturation. What's a base? Well, it's the most abundant cations are called bases: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, aluminium, more important than acid soils, and hydrogen, the non-nutrient mineral that makes soils acidic. They are the bases, they are the most dominant cations. And he had this story that these cations which stick on the clay, because they're positive and clay's negative, that there was a percentage of their saturation that would be beneficial. There's an ideal. So he did this 15 years of ridiculous agronomy, thousands and thousands of trials, because I mean, you think you've got 5 things from 1 to 100, so there are literally hundreds of thousands, or about 300,000 combinations between 1 and 100 of those things. So they had to prove that, and he says, yes, I found it. And his finding was that you want slightly more than 2/3, 68% of that clay filled with calcium, and so forth. But there has to be some hydrogen in there, because that hydrogen drops the pH. And so that little bit of hydrogen, the 10% hydrogen he found was ideal, gives you a 6.4, takes 7 down to 6.4, and 6.4 is where everything's most available. So that was the finding. But the total exchange means you've measured hydrogen. There are still labs out there, and I don't know what they're thinking, but there are quite a few labs that measure cation exchange without factoring in hydrogen, and that's nonsense. It doesn't matter if it's an alkaline soil, because if it's above 7, there's 0 hydrogen. It's only when hydrogen makes soils acidic. If it's an alkaline soil, it's got high magnesium, hydrogen's being displaced and it's not there. So that doesn't matter. It's going to have the same reading. But if it's really acidic, you know, if you've got a pH of 5.2 and you don't factor in hydrogen, then you do these percentages. You say, oh, I've got 68% calcium. No, you haven't, because 1/3 of the pipe's hydrogen didn't factor in, so you can take 1/3 off that. That's why you've got to have a test that tells you the whole thing. Otherwise, those percentages, which are really important, I mean, the first thing I look at it sort of is how's their cation balance, because that has such an impact and one of the parts of that will be the calcium to magnesium ratio. Why is that so important? Because it governs whether your soil can breathe. It's that important. It's the single most important ratio. And you look at this, your base saturation, and you divide magnesium into, and you see here, you need, in this case, slightly more, because heavier clays need a little bit more and a little less. So it's usually 68-12. You still, 68 and 12 add up to 80, but whatever you do, you never go above 80, because you displace other things on the clay. particularly potassium. So you just go a little bit more calcium in this heavy clay and a little less magnesium, so 70-10 instead of 68-12. And this bloke's got 58 instead of 70, and he's got 30%. He's got 3 times more magnesium than he needs in that soil. So when you add it, when you divide one into the other, on a good test, it will tell you your cal-mag ratio. What you need here is 7-to-1. You can see there, dividing 10 into 7, 7-to-1. And what you got, you can see here, 30 going into 58, it's not even quite 2-to-1. It's 1.95 to 1. So you're a long way off the ratio that determines whether you can breathe. And I mentioned big ball called calcium, positive charge on each side, grabbing negatively charged clay particles, pushing them apart and flocculating the soil. In comes the oxygen, out comes the CO2 to grow stuff. So it's that important. You've got no calcium, and how's that going to happen? You're going to have a soil that doesn't breathe. The most important nutrient, far more important than NPK or calcium, the most important single nutrient is called, or element is called oxygen. Just like you've got 2 minutes to block your pathways off. Most important single element for all life is oxygen. And the cal-mag ratio determines whether you got that. So if you've got the scenario now, you can see that you need 12% calcium to get to 70. Well, what happens, and it's unique to calcium and magnesium, is that as you put every 1% of calcium that you add in there, you push 1% magnesium off the clay colloid. It's a direct one-to-one displacement. But when you get to the ideal, it just stops displacing. Like nature says, we're there now, mate. I mean, it sort of tells you that there's some validity to that because it stops happening once you get there. So you would put the appropriate amount of calcium, and I'll explain exactly how you work that out later. But when you've added your 12 to make 70, you're going to lose 12 here. So that doesn't get you right there. You're at 18% now because you're taking 12 off 30. But then if you combine your calcium with lime and gypsum, gypsum is calcium sulfate, breaks apart, joins onto magnesium, forms magnesium sulfate, and that's the most leachable form of magnesium. When it rains, you push out more of your magnesium. That's how you balance it. So we'll just move our way down and talk about various things. So TEC, you've got to have that on your test because it tells you, like here, you can see it's higher, the TEC, because the hydrogen's factored into it. So see there's 9% hydrogen in this particular soil. So you need to have that on your soil test. Now, pH, of course, we're chasing 6.4, and this bloke's got 6.4, but it's also how it's made up. The pH is good, but there's things that are seriously lacking here. Organic matter, the one thing he's done, he's actually an organic grape grower, this bloke. The one thing he's done well, there's a lot of things being neglected, but the one thing he's done well is he's put, which organic people often do, he's put on heaps of compost, and consequently he's taken the soil from 1.5% organic matter up to 6.5. And that's really, really important because you've now got things that hold leachable anions. The only thing that stores them is humus, and you've built it up to 6.52%, which is really nice. And let's look and see if it's working. So let's talk about, well, look at this. One of the anions is called nitrate. Now, this is an organic bloke, never used pot nitrate or coal nitrate in his life, but you need 10 to 20 parts per million of nitrate. He's got 29. How the hell's that happening? He's never put nitrate in his life because every bit of nitrogen was in his compost. It was gone through and converted to nitrate. The nitrate is now stored instead of leaching on that 6.52% humus. He's held onto that nitrogen, that precious nitrogen. You'd say that's an overdose, but it's not in an organic form because it wasn't put on as coal nitrate or whatever. It's actually a nice level of nitrogen, even though it's more than what's required, stored beautifully on its humus. And then you say, well, sulphur, everyone's got 5, 10, 8 parts per million, and you need 30 to 50. So people haven't put it back. We don't get it for free from the rain anymore. It's lacking everywhere you look. And he's not lacking. How come? How come he's got 43 parts per million of sulphur? I mean, it's really good levels of sulphur level because the humus holds it. Every bit of sulphur that's in his compost is stored on the humus in his soil, and he's holding on to it. Then you say, what's the other leachable thing? Well, it's boron. Boron's the most leachable trace mineral, and it's an anion that only stores on the humus. So we look down at his boron levels, and this is, you need to have at least 1 part per million. That's the absolute bare minimum. He's got 0.7. So you ring him and say, when did you put your last boron? He says, boron? He's never done boron in his life. It's organic by neglect, which is really common in organics, to just put on some compost and do nothing else. But the good news for him is that when he decides to fertigate some boron, or however he wants to put it out, it will stay there because it will store very, very ably on that 6.52% organic matter. So you just got to fix that thing, and it was fixed for a long time to come. So that's just the organic matter, really important. The single most important part of your soil, and you want to know that, the most important single component is organic matter. Organic matter is the gold. I told you about the National Bank. Those hundreds of farms in the Hillston region tested for 3 years. What determines profitability? Single most important thing, organic matter. The percentage of organic matter was the single biggest determinant of your profitability. That's why it's a cool thing that you're going to get paid to build organic matter. It's like the biggest win-win ever in agriculture, that people are going to pay you because you're sequestering carbon to do the thing that's going to make you most profitable. So organic matter is huge. The Cal-Mag ratio should be on a good test. Conductivity, what's that a measure of? Conductivity is a simple measure of mineral salts. Everyone says, oh, it's sodium. No, it's not. Sodium is part of the story, but conductivity is all salts. All minerals are salts. Everything, calcium carbonate is a salt. Every nutrient you put on there is a salt, a mineral salt. So conductivity is a measure of have you got enough activity or have you got too much, which overwhelms things if you've got too much. So you can do a simple little conductivity test. You're going to plant a crop and it's less than 0.2 on your little test, which I'll teach you a little later, then you're not going to have any oomph. There's going to be nothing. Usually it means you're lacking potassium because potassium has more impact on conductivity than any other mineral. So if you do this simple little test with half soil, half water and put your conductivity meter in there, you need to have enough kick, enough mineral nutrition to drive that plant. And when you get to flowering, you need to be 0.6, 0.8 on your test because you need more minerals to finish the crop off and size things up and all the rest of it. And potassium is the biggest one because potassium is the money mineral that makes you money because it sizes stuff, pumps sugars in and sizes fruit, sizes grain and so forth. So conductivity is a handy little test telling you where you're at. Now he's just got the 0.2 and he needs 0.2 to 0.6 as we said. So he's just scraped through, but it's been driven by an excess. It's not that he's got enough potassium. It's been driven by this high magnesium, that salt that you're measuring there, to give him that bare minimum. So Cal-Mag ratio, we talked about it. A good test should give you that. The two forms of nitrogen should be measured, and we're looking 10 to 20, but you never have them at 1 to 1, which is the ideal, because they fluctuate and ammonia has been converted to nitrate constantly by organisms and so forth. But, usually if you've got 7 or 8, that's enough will get you through, particularly if you foliar spray a bit of urea if you're allowed to. Phosphorus, this very, very important mineral that you can't make sugars without it. So the whole thing you're doing is making sugar. You're making glucose through photosynthesis that drives everything, including your bank account. The better you do that, the better you do. You don't want blotches and you don't want chlorosis ever. Chlorosis is a loss of chlorophyll that houses the sugar factories that make you money. So you don't want pale colours, blotches and stripes because you're not making enough glucose. Everywhere there's a pale colour, blotch and stripe, there's no sugar factories making sugar that make your money. That's why you have to take care of all the things that give you blotches, pale colours and stripes. So that's a huge issue from that. And so that process then of photosynthesis, of making sugar from carbon dioxide, water and sunlight, in this almost miraculous process that creates glucose, a building block of everything, including you, comes from that first process. It's driven by phosphorus. The starting point is the battery of all life called adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and then every enzyme that makes sugar's got a phosphate link to it. So without phosphate, you can't do it very good. So it makes it one of the big four. It's hugely important when you've got to look after phosphate. You've got to get some in there somehow. So this bloke's not looked after it. He's grown an intensive crop, wine grapes. He needs 50 minimum, he's got half that. He's got 23. So, immediately you say, well, there's an issue. And then what we'll talk about now, I'll jump the gun a bit before I move through. What we'll talk about is how do you figure out what you need? Here's how you do it. You need to write this down in your notebook because it's not on these notes. A part per million is 1 kilo per acre. You say, why are you talking acres? Because that's how it works out. If you want it per hectare, then you multiply that 1 kilo per acre by 2.5, which roughly gives you the hectare rate. So what does that mean? Let's have a look. Let's say, okay, we want to figure out how much lime we want to have. We don't want to go to the rural store and say, I'll put out 4 tonnes, mate, if it doesn't need 4 tonnes, because you put too much calcium, it shuts things down. So you need to know. So you say, okay, well, I've got a good soil test will show you what you need, the ideal level in that soil to give you your 70% saturation of calcium. You need 4,839 parts per million. It's quite precise. You don't have to be that precise. It can be rough, but what you've got is 4,000. So you need 800 parts per million. So what's that? It's 800 kilos. A part per million is a kilo per acre. 800 kilos of calcium per acre will fix the soil for a long time to come. What's that? Well, lime is 40% calcium. That's 400 kilos. That means you need 2 tons of lime per acre. Then you multiply by 2.5. 2 times 2.5 is 5 tons of lime. The job's done. 5 tons of lime in the soil fixes your calcium, no more. 5 tons is exactly fixes it. And that addition of 18%, which is what 5 tons will give you, will push 18% off the magnesium off. We see here the calcium's 4,000, needs to be 4,800, so we need 800 kilos of calcium per acre, and that's 2 tons of lime because it's 400 kilos per tonne, 40%, 400 kilos per tonne. So 2 tons of lime per acre, but we want hectare rates, so you multiply it by 2.5, and that gives you 5 tons per hectare. And now the job's fixed, and you've pushed off your magnesium and changed your whole soil structure. That's why calcium is so important. So what you would do in this instance, because that's not going to fix the lot, so lime has 400 kilos, gypsum has half of that. So it doesn't have as much calcium, it's only half the calcium, but it has sulphur, and the sulphur, so gypsum is called calcium sulfate, and what happens, why they call gypsum the clay breaker is because gypsum, when it gets in the soil, breaks apart, it's called ionizing, and the sulphur grabs hold of magnesium and grabs hold of sodium and forms magnesium sulfate and sodium sulfate, and they're really leachable. You get some rain, it just pulls those excesses out of your soil and changes your soil structure, and that's why they call it the clay breaker. The 2 things that make soils tight and closed are sodium and magnesium, too much of them, and you pull them out with the gypsum, because the gypsum joins onto them and makes them leachable, and then the sulfur in the gypsum joins onto them. So what you would do in this, trying to correct it, is you'd make some of that 5 tons of lime. You wouldn't do all of that. You just know for a start that you've got 5 tons you need to fix it. So you say, okay, I'll do 4 tons, and then just I'll do a ton of gypsum. No, because gypsum's only got half. You do 2 tons of gypsum. You would actually put 4 tons of lime and 2 tons, which equates to the calcium and 1 ton of lime, 2 tons of gypsum. Now you've got the sulfur to remove the rest of that magnesium, and that would be your perfect recipe to fix the soil. 2 tons of gypsum, 4 tons of lime. Now the important thing is that you can't put more than 5 tons of lime on at one time, so it's right at the top end. If this was a heavier soil and you needed 7 tons, you would never do that in one hit. It's a salt and it will tie up things. So the maximum you can put on is that 5 tons. And I would probably prefer to do it over 2 years. Yeah, it's right at that top end of requirements. So it's nice to do. I mean, some people just do a ton of hectare, every second year or something, but I'd rather get it up there, open that soil up, get the whole thing functioning as quick as you can do it. If you can afford it, of course. So that's the Cal-Mag ratio. Now we work out the Cal-Mag because we're going to talk about these key ratios, the agronomic ratios that we look at to really optimize your production. So Cal-Mag ratio is number 1 for good reason, because it's right at the top of the tree, and it determines whether or not you breathe. And so you go down to the base saturation, which should always, some sources don't even include this, so they're meaningless. The first thing you look at is how good are my major cations and how good is their balance. What you do for the Cal-Mag ratio is that you divide magnesium into calcium, and you can see there it's less than 2 to 1. 30 doesn't go into 58 more than 2 times, it's less than 2. So that's your Cal-Mag. That's how you work out your Cal-Mag ratio. But a good soil test will tell you what it should be for that soil, and it'll also tell you what you're chasing, so you can easily figure out. Now let's do that part per minute. We're going to do soil corrections that you can work out your own requirements, and the biggest thing is just knowing 1 kilo per acre is 1 part per million. First thing is, let's talk for a minute about phosphate. Now, if you're growing, a field crop's just a 100-day crop or something, you're a broadacre field crop, even a crop of oats, whatever, there's a place for DAP and MAP because you need that soluble kick. And so you can stabilise them with that 5% humic acid granules, which you can take off the amount of the DAP, so it doesn't cost you anything. But if you're a pasture or you're an orchard crop, to have something, although here's a study, so it wasn't a study for a year or a crop cycle, it was 13 years by the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, and they took equal percentage of phosphate in a rock phosphate form versus triple super, which is the highest analysis of the water-soluble phosphates. So the triple super was like 200 or 300 kilos a hectare, I think 280 or something, and that took 1.1 tons of the rock phosphate to have the same amount. So you think, well, that's better, I didn't cart all that extra stuff around. First year, they looked at the release of phosphate in the soil from those 2 applications, and of course the triple super walked all over. The rock phosphate actually didn't release anything. I mean, that's really unusual. It means the soil was completely lacking in organisms, and it wasn't soft rock, which is much easier to break down, or guano, which is even easier. It was hard rock phosphate. But then the next year, 10 times more than what you were getting from the original triple. And for the next 9 years, average was 10 times more. And for the final 4 years, 13-year study, 9 times more. So you add up one column, what did I get? You got the gift that keeps on giving. There's no comparison. No comparison. It just takes longer to kick in, and it releases and releases and releases and releases. And if you've got pasture or you've got an orchard or a vineyard, then you would never, ever, what's the logic in putting out? But I mean, having said that, you know, so soft rock, guano, you know, are great options, but so is chicken manure, and it's cheap as chips. And if you can get something like BAM onto that and do in situ composting, you've actually got the cheapest source of phosphate out there. It's ridiculously cost effective. And it's got all the other minerals in it as well. You know, like I said, there's $300 worth of nutrients in a ton of chicken manure, and you pay $30 for it. I mean, it's just an insane bargain that's out there at the moment until people sit down with a calculator and figure out what they're getting. So how would you work out what phosphate you need? Okay, so if we're looking here and we've got 23 and we need 50, let's say it was 20 and we need 50, we need 30 kilos of actual phosphate per acre, okay? So if we were using soft rock with 10%, 100 kilos gives us a ton gives us 100 kilos per acre. Well, that's more than what we need. So half a ton gives us 50 kilos per acre. Is that what we're saying? Yeah, 10%, a ton. Yeah, 50 kilos, half a ton gives us 50 per acre. That's more than what we need. So, you know, it's going to come down to, so you can do with like guano slightly higher, it's 12%, but you basically work on, well, that's 120 kilos per ton of actual P, and you work out that parts per million thing, so you can work out exactly what will take you from 20, the 30 parts per million you need, the 30 kilos per acre of actual phosphorus that will take you to 50, and that's going to be different with DAP and different whatever. You do the same principle. The only thing is that you're going to be slower in the release of those phosphate compared to DAP, which is instant, but then ties up very quickly. Yeah, so we look at something like zinc, and we say, okay, well, let's just say he had 2 and we want 5 minimum, so we need 3 kilos of zinc. So when you say, well, how much is that going to be of zinc sulfate? Well, zinc sulfate's about a third zinc. It's about 33 to 35% zinc. So it takes 3 kilos of zinc sulfate to make 1 kilo of actual zinc. Remember, it's only a third zinc in zinc sulfate. So 3 kilos makes 1, and we want 3 kilos. We want 3 parts per million, which is 3 kilos per acre. So we need 3 kilos to make 1. So we need 3 times 3. So we need 9 kilos of zinc sulfate per acre to give us 3 parts per million. You say, well, I'm not doing acres. So you multiply 9 by 2.5, and that comes to 9 is 18.5, and 9 is 22.5 kilos of zinc sulfate, which is almost a bag, a couple of kilos out of a bag, and that's fixed your zinc for years and years to come. If you wanted to play the whole game and have everything correct, then that's how you figure it out. A kilo, part per million is a kilo per acre, but you've got to say how much is in the zinc, because this is pure zinc. There's only a third zinc in zinc sulfate, say 3 kilos makes 1 kilo, and you need 3 parts per million, so it's 3 times 3 is 9, times 2.5, 17.5. Now, if you were copper, and you've got plenty in the soil, but you need a minimum of 2. Say you had 1 and you wanted 2, because they have enough copper, and copper is really important because it governs stem strength and it governs protein formation, and it's the mineral that plants use most to protect themselves from fungal disease, so it's quite an important mineral. But how would you go from 1 to 2? Well, copper sulfate's only 25% copper, so it takes 4 kilos of copper sulfate. And so you say, okay, I want 1 part per million per acre, so 4 kilos per acre, but I want hectares, 4 times 2.5, 10 kilos of copper sulfate, you've got 1 part per million. You can put that on the board, you've worked it out, now put it on your wall, because you can do that with everything. You say, okay, it takes this many kilos for this part per million, and then you've got it. You just look at your walls, oh, I need this. Anyone can do this, it's not hard.